Shalom, family. Shalom. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. Good. All right. All right. That's good. All right. So, yesterday, what happened was I use a software to do my slides on, and sometimes I can do videos in that same software. Well, my machine upgraded to Windows 11 that I did it on. And so, therefore, the software had to be updated as well. So, when the software updated, it added in this default music to the slide. So, when I was doing the slides yesterday, I could see it, but I didn't hear the music. Y'all heard the music, but on my end, I didn't hear anything. So when I went back to play it again, and that's when I heard the music. That music was never supposed to be there. I don't need music to get through these slides. I pretty much know and plan out what I'm going to say. So there's no need for music. So I do apologize for that. It should not happen again. Now that I'm fully aware that they by default put the music in, before I download, I can make sure there's no music in the slides. So it should be a lot better today. At least that's what I anticipate. So, shalom to everybody in the chat. And what I will do this time around, I will go over the slides, and then we will get to the story in regards to Emmett Till's family. They want Carolyn Bryant Dunham brought up on charges. Okay. So let's get started. All right. This is Emmett Till's mother and father. Emmett Till's father was in the U.S. Army, and he was lynched by the U.S. Army back in 1945. He was stationed over in Italy, and in Italy, he was accused of killing an Italian woman and raping two other women. So he was put to death right over there by being hung. So he died in 45, and Emmett Till, his son, died 10 years later in 1955. Yes. So I don't know if I believe that about him or not, because let's be real, these folks tell lies on us all day and all night. And that is the truth. And I would not be surprised if at the end of the day, we find out he didn't do any of these things, because they're notorious for doing that. And we do know that. And the same things they do today, they did back then. Nothing changes. Not a thing. All right. So the next slide is Mamie and him when he was just a baby. So, I mean, this is such a travesty. Emmett Till was born in 1941, and his life was over by the time he was 14. That is just outrageous. It really is. It should never have happened. This is Emmett Till. They believe this picture was taken in 1950. This is Emmett Till right here. He was 9 in this picture, and these are his cousins. And this picture was taken in Chicago. They believe around 1950. Definitely a cute kid. Yeah, Carolyn, Brian Dunham, she should have been arrested decades back. And I'll tell you how I feel about that once we get through the whole thing. So this is the way Emmett looked around the time he died. This was taken in 1955 when he was 14 years old. And we've seen his pictures of him when he was a teenager. This is the store that Carolyn Bryan back then and her husband owned. Now, here's the store. They actually lived above the store. They lived up here. Okay. So the store was down here. So they all lived, her and her husband and two kids lived in this building upstairs. There was an apartment above the store, and that's where they lived. And it was called Brian's Grocery and Meat Market. This store was in Money, Mississippi, in the hood, where the black folks lived. That's where the store was. All of their clientele was people from the black community. That's who frequented her store back then. They probably were her main customers because she was placed in that neighborhood. So the thing is, after the trial was over, those folks would not go back in there and buy from Carolyn and her husband. So after the trial, shortly after that, the store closed. I mean, sort of like what we should be doing to these Chinese and Arab stores in the area that we live in. Yeah, don't go in there and they'll go out of business real fast. So this is a shell of the store and what it looks like. You can see it's all it's not very much left of it anymore, as you can see in the picture. And that's a more of a frontal shot of it. So you can see this building is gone. It is really gone. So Black History Month. This is Money, Mississippi. In late summer 1955, Emmett Till was murdered for whistling at a white woman outside Bryan's Grocery and Meat Market. So this is what's left. Now, there is a marker because you can take tours through there, and it is markers in different locations of, that leads to Emmett Till's death. So here's the marker outside of the old grocery store that Carolyn Bryant and her husband ran, and the store that Emmett Till was accused of whistling at her. This is a picture of the shed that Emmett Till was taken to and killed in. And this is again all in Money, Mississippi. This is his mother, and you can see, she's a much older woman in this picture. She never stopped fighting for her son her whole life. I think it's a shame she did not get the justice that she was looking for. She did marry again after Emmett was killed, but she didn't have any more children. This is the church that held Emmett Till's funeral. So this is Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ in Chicago. His funeral was September 6, 1955. So I just wanted to show you a few things that you may not have seen before. You can see it was packed. There was a lot of people there. A lot. and you can see his mother grieving. Do you know they tried to convince her mother, Emmett Till's mother, Mamie, they tried to convince her not to have any funeral, not to show him at all, just put him in the ground. And she was like, "Oh no. Oh no. Imma show what y'all did to my son." But in yeah, those folks in Mississippi tried to convince her, "Just put him in the ground. Don't have no funeral, don't show him." How dare you try to tell this woman what to do with her own son? It takes some kinda arrogance to even open your mouth to say something like that to her. So, it's a terrible thing, especially for, you losing your only child. That's horrible. That's a horrible feeling. This is Emmett Till's grave site in Chicago. He was born in the summer, July 25th, 1941. This is Carolyn Bryant. Now, we know Emmett Till was 14 years old when his life was violently taken from him. This is Carolyn Bryant and her then husband at the time. Um, Carolyn actually had 3 boys, all right? So, this was Roy Jr., Roy Bryan Jr. He died back in 1995 of cystic fibrosis. This is her son, Phil, who went on to become the governor of Mississippi. And I'll show you pictures of him towards the end. If you were here yesterday, you already saw this. Yes, Carolyn is still alive. She is in her 80s. She's in her 80s. All right. So, this son is dead. She had another son by the name of Frank, and Frank died in 2010. So she has outlived 2 of her sons. Well, her husband died really at a young age. I think he had cancer, throat cancer, and he didn't live long at all. I don't even think her first husband even made it to be a senior citizen. He died young. In fact, both of the men that killed Emmett Till, or her brother-in-law, also died at a young age. Both of these men died young. Okay. Now, what I was telling y'all yesterday was when I was probably around in the 8th grade, I had heard about Emmett Till by reading Ebony magazine. And I remember I went up and I was talking to my mother and I said, "Mom, did you ever hear of Emmett Till?" And she was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And she said that his death spread rapidly across the South. Everybody, it didn't matter if you were in another state, you heard about Emmett Till back then. And she had told me, things that were happening in the South. That's when, civil rights was, I would say, like, at the grassroots level back then, but Emmett Till's death actually kicked off the civil rights movement. And I decided to do Emmett Till as a class assignment. We were allowed to pick something in history. So I picked Emmett Till. And I remember my mother and I went up to the library to see if I could get some books out on Emmett Till. And I did find some books, but they had the actual court case audio. So I was like, okay. So I went up to see if I could check it out, and they did allow me to check the audio of the trial out. So I remember when I got home and I put the tape in, it just shook me. I'm just an eighth grader. It was so much N-word used in the court, it was not even funny. Even when Carolyn got up on the stand to give her testimony, she just N-word the whole thing through. And you know how even today, you know how you'll be talking to somebody or you'll listen to the way they're talking to you and you can detect this person ain't telling the truth. They're lying. It was almost like it hit me like a ton of bricks when I was listening to her testimony. It just sounds so fake. But she was like, well, the N word did this, and then the N word did that, and then the N word walked over here, and the N word did that. That's how she gave her whole testimony. I mean, they were all using them N words up in the court. And it for a while, I think I got like 10, 15 minutes into the audio, and I had to turn it off. And then I remember I went to my mother and I was like, they're saying the N word all in through the. And my mother said, yes, in the South, that's not the only place. She said they were doing that all across the South back in the day. They would go in, and she said, your prosecutors, your judge, your defendants, everybody would be in that courtroom using the N word. She said that was a very prevalent thing in the South, and they had no shame about doing that. So it shocked me. But eventually I did get through all of the audio, but it was hard in the beginning getting through all of that. It was difficult. But that's how she gave her whole testimony. And I was like, this woman is such a liar. I could just hear the lies in her voice. You just knew she was lying. So, that, but back then they choose to believe them over us. That's how it was. And still is technically. But it just proves how rigged up the system really is. Even you could see it even back then. Here's Carolyn Bryant. You can see she got to live to be a ripe old age in her 80s. She robbed Emmett Till of that, but she got to do it. Now, this picture, I believe, was taken when she was around 60 years old. It's just amazing. Here is Phil Bryant. Phil Bryant is her son. Now, the governor now actually took over from him. So he recently have finished his term as governor in Mississippi. And, he's no longer governor. You got the new governor, the one I was telling y'all about in the video. He wanted to make April Confederate Heritage Month. So that just go to show you the mindset of these people that are running Mississippi. So this is Phil Bryant. This is, I believe, the second son that Carolyn Bryant had. And Phil is still living and he's still down in Mississippi. And to be honest with you, since he was the governor, I believe he gets protection for the rest of his life and his family members. So I think Carolyn is probably under protection because he was a governor in that state. And there's another picture of Phil in here too. And Phil was a big Trump supporter. Her son Phil, this is Phil again. He was a huge Trump supporter too. In fact, if you go online, you can actually see him in pictures with Donald Trump. Yeah, yeah, he does look like his mother. He sure does. So, yeah, he was the governor of Mississippi. Yes, he was. And not that long ago. Not that long ago. The new governor just took over recently. Yes. I think that's why it's kind of good to go over some of these things because you may not know, a lot of the things that have happened since the death of Emmett Till, you know? So recently, his relatives have been inquiring about a warrant that was issued in 1955. And it was a warrant that was meant for Carolyn Bryant at the time for the kidnapping of Emmett Till. Now, you know that when it comes down to murder, there is no statute of limitation for murder. So, no, technically, it would not be too late to even get her as an elderly woman for what has happened to Emmett Till. You know, you would be within your right to even go after her. So, no, it wouldn't be unheard of. I mean, look, don't we see this with Nazis? Don't that some of these Nazis are what in their 90s and they're still going after them? So, Carolyn Bryant shouldn't be that untouchable, but because America is a very racist nation, opposite of what Tim Scott says, they're going to still protect this woman. They are. And I wish the family could get everything they're requesting. And if the state of Mississippi cannot go after Carolyn Bryant, then you need to compensate them monetarily for what happened. I don't believe the family should be penniless. They need to get compensated for the death of their cousin. All right, so Emmett Till's relative, they want the accuser to be prosecuted in his 1955 kidnapping. So, stymied in their call for renewed investigation into the killing of Emmett Till, relatives and activists are advocating another possible path towards accountability in Mississippi. They want authorities to launch a kidnapping prosecution against the woman who set off the lynching by accusing the Black Chicago teen of improper advances in 1955. Now, let me stop right there. Ladies and gentlemen, Emmett Till had polio when he was 6 years old. His mother said that when he recovered from polio, that's when he developed a stutter. But she said prior to that, he never spoke with any stuttering. Okay. And so Carolyn Bryan Dunham was named nearly 67 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. 67 years ago in a warrant that accused her of Till's abduction, even before his mangled body was found in a river. FBI records show, yet she was never arrested and brought to trial in the case. You know why they didn't arrest her, y'all? You know why? Let me tell you why. In 1955, Carolyn Bryant was 21 in 1955 when Emmett was killed. You know why they didn't arrest her? They said because she was a mother and she had children. That was the excuse they used for not arresting Carolyn Bryant Dunham. Can you imagine that? You know how many Black women have gone to jail and they had children? I remember some of them that got arrested and they had children, and some were pregnant with children and they still got locked up. But that's the excuse they used for not arresting her in 1955 because she was a mother and had young children. That's what they used. What a joke. What a joke. You don't let anybody else get away with that. So, they had the trial and her husband and brother-in-law were acquitted. Nothing happened, but you shouldn't be surprised by that. It was an all-white jury in 1955 that let these two men off for an atrocity that, I mean, they just overkilled Emmett when you looked at his mangled up body. They just went overboard in killing this young teenager. But that is the reason she was a mother of young children. Make no mistake, relatives of Till still prefer a murder prosecution, but there is no evidence of the kidnapping warrant was ever dismissed. So if it was never dismissed, that warrant is still technically in effect. So that's what they're saying. So it could be used to arrest Dunham and finally get her before a criminal court. Jarbaru Hill, an attorney working for Till's family. The warrant is a stepping stone towards that, she said, because warrants do not expire. We want to see that warrant served on her. Now, they did speak to Carolyn Bryant, during the interview she had. She said she wasn't even aware of a warrant for her. She never knew. Nobody ever spoke to her about a warrant back in 1955. And to be honest with you, she may actually be telling the truth about that. I mean, look, if the police department was saying they didn't want to serve her because she had young children, they probably never bothered to tell her there was such a warrant. So she claims she did not know and was not aware of any warrant for the kidnapping of Emmett Till. So Mississippi is not the Mississippi of 1955. I tell you what, as long as y'all don't arrest this woman, you are the Mississippi of 1955 as far as I'm concerned. But it still carries some of the era in protecting the white woman, said Deborah Watts, a distant cousin of Till's, who runs the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. Now in her late 80s, and most recently living in Raleigh, North Carolina, Dunham has not commented publicly on her calls for prosecution. She did not seem to know that she was named in an arrest warrant in Till's abduction until decades later. This is what they're claiming. So now here's where you know it's rigged. Here's where you know it's rigged, ladies and gentlemen. The Justice Department, yes, the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., looked into this case and they decided to close it. So that's another indication they don't want to do nothing to Carolyn Bryant Dunham. The Justice Department closed the case. Well, Emmett Till sure didn't kill himself. He didn't kidnap himself. He didn't beat himself up and kill himself up in a shed and then over to a river to be weighed down by cinder blocks. That's what they did to him. They weighed his body down in the river with cinder blocks. I mean, it was just overkill. So, mm, mm, mm. Let me just go down a bit. So Till was 14 years old from Chicago visiting relatives in Mississippi. And I had learned that many of Till's relatives actually lived in Chicago. They migrated up to Chicago. Back during the time of Reconstruction, the family left Mississippi, but some decided to stay in Mississippi. So he was visiting his cousins and his aunts and uncles down there in Mississippi at the time. So he was visiting relatives in Mississippi when he entered the store on August 24th, 1955. Dunham, then 21, yep, Carolyn was 21 when Emmett was killed, was working inside. Till relative who was there at the time, Wheeler Parker, told the Associated Press that Till whistled at the woman. Dunham testified that Till grabbed her. Okay, this is what she was claiming. 2 nights later, Dunham's then husband, Roy Bryan, and his half brother, J.W. Meelam, showed up at the rural home of Till's great uncle. Now, his aunt was in the house. When they busted in the house, she had offered to give them money. She was like, "Look, I'll give you all of my money. I'll give you every dime. Just leave him alone." But they just pushed past her and they snatched him right out of the bed. He was in the bed sleeping, and they snatched him right out of the bed. And, he didn't know what the hell was going on. And what a terrible thing. So he was found, wow. He was found in the Tallahatchie River a few days later. And we know her husband was arrested, but Carolyn was never, ever arrested. But Roy Bryan was. So Roy Bryan and his brother-in-law were quickly indicted on murder charges, and they were acquitted by an all-white jury in Tallahatchie County about 2 weeks later. So the trial only lasted about 2 weeks. So, like I said, Carolyn and her husband tried to reopen their store, but the people that lived there, because they were in a black neighborhood after the trial, nobody would go back in that store and buy from them. So ultimately they lost their business and lost everything. They literally lost everything after the trial. So I really do hope there is justice for Emmett Till's family, but the way they rig up the system, and you got the Justice Department closing the case, and it's just, this place is too evil and too corrupt to do the right thing. They are not going to do the right thing. They're not going to do right by Emmett Till and what has happened to him. But, I guess you try whatever you think may have a chance of working. But I think with all of the protections and everything they have given her all these decades, they're going to continue to do that. Is it right? Hell no, it's not right. That, excuse my language, but that bitch needs to pay. She does. You took this child out of here on a lie. You took him out over a lie. You got to be a sick kind of creature to come up with a lie that ends a person's life. There's got to be a special part of that lake of fire that your behind is going in, for real. So everybody, I'm glad today we were able to go through this without the music, you know, and I am sorry that happened. Like I said, I was not expecting something like that after the software updated. And I did play it through before I uploaded it. And like I said, I didn't hear any music on my end. It was not until I played it back that's when I heard it. So I'm just glad we were able to do this over again. Yeah, I wanted to redo it because I'm petty and I'm like that. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope that maybe you learned something out of this before, that you may not have known before. Yeah, well, Mississippi is extremely racist. Do y'all know during Reconstruction, they were trying to put plans together to ship their former slaves back to Africa? They were trying to do that in Mississippi. Yeah, old good old Mississippi. But y'all, look, my grandmother on my dad's side, she comes out of Mississippi, but she lived most of her life in Georgia, but that's where she's from. So I got people down in Mississippi too. So, everybody, thank you for being here, and may the Most High keep his strongest hedge of protection around you always. Shalom, family.